Thanks, Andrew.
Wonderful. Well, welcome and thanks for hanging in there, everybody. Really appreciate that. As usual, the show must go on. So welcome to Global Azure 2024, the Vancouver Technical User Group presentation. And we'll be talking about mastering the pulse of Microsoft Sentinel today. So first up, I'll introduce myself a little bit here. So I'm Andrew Lowes. I have a lot of passion for all things Microsoft Azure, and especially in security. So I first started writing a little bit of code in VB6 and Python. I might be dating myself a little bit there, but it was Python before it was cool, right? And really worked to do a lot of innovation with some partners across Canada, US, and the UK. And I quickly learned that I really loved working with data centers and moving them into Azure through migration, and started working on a lot of security incident investigations as a result of all the big shift to cloud. So today, I often find myself helping customers with Azure services, migrations, of course, and especially Microsoft Sentinel and SOC team building. I really enjoy working with Sentinel so much because there's such a variety of things that I can do in my day. A little bit selfish, but that's okay, right? So from working in KQL and building and improving existing analytics rules to working on threat hunting, even maybe working a little bit on infrastructure through kind of that SecOps role that we often play in a security department. So there's so much to do. I really just love working in Sentinel and security. So you can find me on LinkedIn and on my blog. I have a couple of articles in there. And my good friend here shown is Mia, and she's a working line German Shepherd. And we often adopt retired police dogs. This one, however, just didn't make the cut. She's actually too energetic for law enforcement. She loves her chicken hat, however. So we have a little bit of fun with her still. All right, down to business. Let's talk agenda. So just a bit of a quick look over some of the topics we're going to cover. I've also added a little bonus topic in just because everybody's been so darn patient tonight. So really appreciate that. And we'll talk a little bit about that bonus when we get just before the Q&A there. So let's have a little bit of fun and let's jump right in. So it's really important to monitor the health of our Microsoft Sentinel-enabled workspaces so that data ingestion isn't interrupted, is a really good example. And we also want to keep an eye on all of the components and different tools that we've configured in those workspaces. So there are some known attack vectors, which recently kind of taken out of the MITRE ATT&CK framework references, but we can still look back to where they would fit within that framework. We also want to work to keep Sentinel healthy so that we can just generally use it to support our SOC team with their investigations. We want to utilize all of our automations, and we want to find those indicators of compromise. So a healthy environment is critical to be able to search through all of that data, of course. So let's be aware that some threat actors are full teams. They have backing. They often run in shifts, just like an office or a factory. It's not like they'll just take a break while we don't have logging all sorted out on our end. So they'll use this to their advantage. We also want to make sure that our Sentinel workspace has good data integrity, that the analytics rules and other components are fully operational and working correctly as intended. This is sometimes overlooked. I've seen a lot of implementations on customer sites that aren't monitoring analytics rules. So we might be collecting data, but maybe the analytics rules haven't been updated to a new schema for a table. There are a lot of tools that SOC teams use in the course of a day, not just Sentinel. So why would Sentinel be any different than a critical server used in our infrastructure? Keeping our finger on the pulse of Sentinel is just as important as any other critical infrastructure component in our production environments. Plus, we can use advanced functionality in Sentinel to automate a lot of our tasks, so we should monitor that automation to keep Sentinel running like a champ. Okay, so to start enabling health monitoring, we'll kind of start at the beginning. So if you've never enabled health monitoring, we'll kind of breeze through this part a little bit quickly, and then we're going to get to a couple of more technical topics. So we'll do a little bit of clicking first here. So we need to have contributor roles on both the resource group where Sentinel enabled workspace lives, and for each workspace that you have. And you'll also need the Sentinel contributor role. And just a reminder that the tables we're using in this session are currently in preview. So we always have to kind of add that little hook, right? So features in preview get that best effort support. And even though it's been out a little bit like, the beta of Gmail, it's been around for a little while now for health monitoring tables, but just be aware that they're still in preview. Okay, pretty fun process to get this enabled. So let's go through it. And again, we'll get to the good stuff here pretty quick. So if you're in your Sentinel workspace already, just head to the settings down at the bottom left, then up to the top and choose the settings tab. I like to actually collapse the other drop downs that are in that settings blade just to kind of keep things a bit clean. Then expand the auditing and health monitoring section and click on enable. And then let's go and configure the diagnostics settings. So once you're in the diagnostic settings, we click on enable there, and then we kind of come in and we enter in. Thought I had my pointer enabled. Sorry, there we go. I think I've been waving my mouse around, but there was no pointer. Sorry about that. So we name our diagnostic setting something like Sentinel all logs, just something really creative so we know what it is later. And then we select all logs up in the top left. And then we select to send the logs to a log analytics workspace. No surprise, we're going to choose our log analytics workspace that we're currently enabling this for. So if we have multiple estates or multiple workspaces enabled across our tenant, we want to make sure that we're sending each one to the correct workspace. So make sure that you do keep that aligned if you have multiple instances of Sentinel. All right, so now that we have Sentinel Health Monitoring enabled, it takes sometimes maybe 10 or 15 minutes to start populating that table. So there are actually two tables that get enabled here. There's Sentinel Audit and Sentinel Health. Today, we're going to talk about Sentinel Health, and it's really quite fast. So you can see here, this is the table that data is written to from the Health Monitor, and kind of a fun fact, it's not billable. So this is great news, right? Free is always wonderful. So it's always nice to get something helpful for free. And while we do have a minor cost to analyzing that data, though as we run analytics rules, there is a compute cost that's associated to that with the Sentinel service. It's quite small. Honestly, it's fractions of a penny to run. It's kind of tough to monitor. It blends into the overall cost. If you add 2 or 3 analytics rules for this that run once or twice a day, nobody will notice the cost increase. So I've grabbed a little bit of a sample of some health monitoring entries here, just to share with you the type of data that we can find. So we'll see different data fetch operations with analysis and automation rule outcomes here as well. And the 3 columns that I'm most interested in this case are the Sentinel resource name, status, and description. The description field can hold some other information that is really helpful for us as we analyze these entries, and it can help to give us clues when something is happening in our environment other than a success status. It's kind of nice, right? So status is easy, but the description can give us a little bit more detail pretty quickly. And we can automate that a little bit with some queries and building rules. So when we share out this presentation, all of the links will be included, and we'll publish a link for this for everybody and for everybody that couldn't make it this evening. And then you'll have a copy of all of the queries and the whole darn presentation. So again, a bit of that honorable mention for the Sentinel audit table. So I just want to talk about that table for a moment, because this is an interesting one from a monitoring perspective and kind of a security audit perspective, but we're not going to focus on this one this evening. So Again, this table is important because we can use this one to determine when and who made a configuration change in our workspace. The recorded operations typically that we're looking at are create, change, delete, enable, and disable. And those are pretty critical when we're talking about, again, a piece of critical infrastructure such as Sentinel. When we're doing security monitoring, we want to make sure that the tool used to do that monitoring is robust and has some resiliency configured into it. So keep in mind that we really should be configuring things on the Sentinel audit table and the Sentinel health table together. Today, we're focusing on Sentinel health. This will help us to keep a robust Sentinel workspace and to stay vigilant. So there's three primary types of resources today in Sentinel that we can get health data about. Really, we want to focus on the data connectors today. So you can take this simple query here, Sentinel health table, and then tell me the distinct entries for Sentinel resource type. And in your own workspace, this will tell you what you can actually work with as far as entries or the resource types that are in your entries existing in this table. So new functionalities and features are always being developed, of course, in Azure. That's part of our evolving ecosystem on a daily basis. So in Microsoft Sentinel, this may change. You never know. We'll have additional things that we can add in here. So just make sure that you use the distinct operator. Otherwise, you'll have quite the list here. So again, covering off just the last of the basics, we've made sure that we have the right roles assigned to be able to make these changes here. So next, we've got auditing and health monitoring turned on. That takes about 10 minutes or so to start populating. And of course, remember that we have a process that only runs once a week. You're going to need to wait until that cycles through that once a week time period. If it runs every Sunday morning or something, you have to wait for that to have a log entry in here to evaluate and do your testing with before creating any additional tooling. So our next step is to define a couple of use cases for our health monitoring. So let's get right to it. So to define our use cases to monitor our Sentinel environment, we need to know what type of data to analyze. This is pretty quick, but it helps us to know what we actually want to monitor in this case. So for our sample here today, we're going to take a look at, we want to verify that data connectors are running correctly, and we want to be able to monitor analytics and automation rules. So those are pretty kind of high level use cases, and we'll dig down into that a little bit kind of as we work through that process. So now that we have those use cases, we can start to kind of build our strategy and make sure that that strategy is aligned with what we want to accomplish with the health monitoring. So again, just to cover off the last of these basics, first we need to have our use cases. Next, we need to make sure that we have a monitoring strategy that's well aligned and easy to understand as a statement. Lastly, we can start building out that monitoring for our Sentinel health. So our overall strategy to monitor Sentinel should include the monitoring of, again, health of resources through the Sentinel health table, roles and permissions through Sentinel audit table, and changes to Sentinel through the same Sentinel audit table. Just as a kind of a high level, we should make sure that we include those as part of our overall strategy. We want to make sure that we're monitoring for changes in configuration and state to the Sentinel workspace and those resources. It's part of that robust strategy and making sure that the tooling itself is functioning the way we think it is. Okay, so today we're going to explore the monitoring of our our health resources in Sentinel. So you can explore the auditing data in your own workspace, as you will have all the tools you need to get everything set up after today. So let's take a look at some logs. One of my favorite things to do is just look at the data. I have a little saying that I usually share with all of my clients, and that's that the data will never lie. The data will always tell us the truth. We just have to learn how to ask it the right questions. The secrets of KQL and SQL queries over the years, I suppose. So, all right. So first up, let's get into some of our data and see what we want to explore a little bit more. So we already know the types of Sentinel resources that we're able to analyze, and we know our use cases. So let's look at a bit more of a full data set here. So I ran this earlier today, and not too bad. We can see that there's a bunch of successes here, and everything's looking pretty good. And there is one failure here. So we need to maybe drill down into this a little bit. And my thinking is that I don't really need to know about all of the success states. I really just want to know about the problems. So that's a little bit cleaner. So now we're just taking a look at what is not a success and not informational or just a bit of a low level update like something executed. I really just want to take a look at anything that isn't okay. That's nice. So I typically refer to that as referring some of the static or removing rather some of the static noise and just show the errors. It's more precise and it allows us to focus on what we need to fix. Okay, so we're looking for that status change from success to failure. So the queries are actually relatively straightforward because we can say that. So when it was a success and it changes to failure, let's take a look at those, right? Now, when we see that that operational or the operation name is equal to the data fetch status change, that's one of the key elements here. So let's see if we can do this maybe a little bit differently again. Now, here is a likely, I think, one of my favorite queries. If you can have a favorite query for Sentinel Health, this is probably one. It's really straightforward. It gives us a nice summary so I can see the resource name. I can validate that the resource type is right in the ID field, and I can see the number of anomalies for the time period that I'm looking at. So we can change that time period dynamically, and we'll reference that time period as part of that strategy a little bit later when we're creating that analytics rule. So this is really simple, but really powerful as a query. So again, notice that there's a count on the anomalies. And I might have generated a few too many errors in my quest to show what it looks like when we have errors, but that's okay. It illustrates it really quite nicely. So let's move to building our analytics rule right out of the query here now. So we jump into Sentinel, we can go down to analytics there on the bottom left navigation menu, and then it loads up the analytics blade. We click on create, and we're going to choose a scheduled query rule. So when we do this, what we're doing is we're saying we want to create a rule that executes on a schedule. So we'll configure the schedule actually just on the next tab here. But when that new blade opens, we just enter the information. I always insist that all of my customers enter a good description. This is very helpful when we're looking at all of the assets in a large workspace or really in any configuration in Azure. That description can help us find what we're looking for, and it can help a new administrator to find the right piece of or the right resource and the right piece of information that they might be looking for. Maybe they want to update a query in one of our analytics rules in 2 years from now because a schema change has happened, but it's tough for them to find it if we don't enter a good description. Sorry for the lecture. It's just so many environments. It's really good to have nice verbose explanations in those descriptions. So we can also choose to label what the definition is that we're kind of meeting in that MITRE ATT&CK framework for tactics and techniques here. So you might want to enter this as part of creating your new analytics rule. And one of the reasons that that can be helpful is on your MITRE ATT&CK framework coverage blade in Sentinel. This is where we kind of report back to there so that that blade knows which tactics and techniques we're targeting with this rule. So one of those things just to be aware of as you create many rules in Sentinel over time. All right, enough of that, right? Let's get to some of this good stuff. So we have the query, and you can see I've put the same query in here. And one of the things that's not in my screenshot here tonight is over to the right of this, is test, right? So we can test it on our live data. And I would really encourage everyone to do that when you're creating analytics rules, because it allows you to see what the rule is actually looking at, and you get to see a live representation of your data set returned. It's returned as a graph, so you can see it usually summarized as a count anyhow. But really, we want to know when anomalies are greater than 0 in this case, because we want to target that health monitoring mentality, right? So when we set the query, we're going to also set that query to run every day. And we're going to set it to run every 1 day, and then we'll set the lookup data to match that. So we'll look at the last 1 day of data and then confirm that the alert threshold is set to greater than 0 for this rule, right? So remember, we had 23 errors in our data set sample there. And it's really important. That's definitely greater than 0, but it should trigger this analytics rule to tell us, hey, you have something happening in your environment with Sentinel Health, and something is wrong with one of those data connectors. So, like I said, it will cause it to trigger. And again, when I tested mine, it had quite a lot of errors in my sample data, which was a little bit funny, but it'll definitely set this analytics rule off. So I also like to set the schedule to start usually at just before everybody's coming in. So if everybody starts their morning around 8 o'clock in the morning, I usually like to run it just before, so about 7 a.m. And it makes it a bit easier to see one of these health incidents in a busy queue in Sentinel. It also makes sure that we have consistency. So over time, the whole SOC team will learn, hey, when there's something that triggers at 7 or 7:01, it's probably going to be a Sentinel Health alert, and we should put our priority there to make sure that we aren't missing any data collection in our estate. So again, it's an analytics rule. What can I say? We save the analytics rule. We check our list of rules. We make sure that it's enabled. And if you're playing along at home here, you may want to disable your rule until you test it and you test your query a little bit more. But I feel like we're in pretty good shape. So there's just one more thing that I kind of want to set out and share here is a couple of extra health-oriented queries. So we can see that the sample rule I'm including here for Sentinel Audit, terribly straightforward and simple, but simply tell us when a result is returned for the resource type of an analytics rule, and the description says that rule's been deleted. That's a really good thing to know about, and it should generate an incident for us or an alert. So let's see what we've got here. Let me bring the bonus slides out from hiding and see what we can do. There we go. So just in case we were going to run out of time, I had a little bonus tip in here about tying all of this back to a logic app. So I'll breeze through this in the essence of time this evening for everybody. But again, when we publish this out, it'll go through it at your own pace a little bit more. So when we start with that data again, we want to really refine what we're querying down. We want to get it to either a count or something that is returning a result of 1 or more or nothing. And typically, when we're doing health monitoring, we want to see nothing returned. So we want to see 0 errors, of course. Now, how do we really get notified that there's problems? Maybe we have a PCI environment that we're monitoring with Sentinel, and we need to know when a data connector has gone down, and we need to know a bit more urgently, let's say. We can use the logic app, and we can tie it to a query. So this is kind of an example of just, if I can say it, a little bit of a quick configuration for setting up a logic app that would work with health monitoring. One of the key things I like to do is, unless we're looking at a high availability, I usually set this to consumption because we're really running this maybe once, twice a day on a schedule. We're not doing an every 5-minute execution. Now, again, that may change in a more urgent environment, but I also turn off zone redundancy, and it really lowers the cost for the logic app in your environment. one of those cost optimization things, right? So when we create the logic app, of course, I like to have a nice blank one so that I can just make my own. And I add the schedule and we set the query. We pass the query through to a variable, and we use a very simple query in this case. Anytime an analytics rule is deleted, and then we use the logic app to send us an email, or we can also link it quite easily through the logic apps to Teams. And one of my favorite things to do is just put it in a Teams channel chat, so the whole team can see that that analytics rule was deleted. And if it was a legitimate delete, then the member of the team typically just gives it a quick like and says, yep, that was me. I'm just cleaning up the environment. We don't need this rule anymore. And then the whole team knows within seconds. It's really easy and it's a non-issue, but everybody still got the notification because they need to know about those types of things. Okay, that was a bit of a whirlwind. I know I was talking a little bit quick, but thanks again for sticking it out to the end of the presentation here. So let's bring everything together. There is a ton of resources on Microsoft Learn for Sentinel Health and monitoring your Sentinel environment. So again, here's the link. This was a nice, easy link, but we've covered off all of our agenda items, plus a fun little logic app to help us along for notifications. And one of the things that I really love, again, about Sentinel is there's so many different things that we can do within the scope of Sentinel. You can really pick and choose a lot of times what you would like to put a bit of a focus on in your own environment. So you can focus on working on KQL, you can work with logic apps, you can even get nitty gritty with a lot of code. So you can write a lot of functions and other automations as well. And of course, not the least of which is what Sentinel is truly intended for, is enabling the SOC to know about incidents quickly and perform mitigations and threat hunting and making sure that the environment stays safe. Awesome. We made it, David. We made it all the way through. So I think we have lots of time for some Q&A. I don't know if people can unmute or if they'd like to drop a note in the chat or something. But if there's any questions, we can hang around for a little while here.
I will see if I can allow people to unmute quickly. Just 1 second. But if they want to use the chat for now, that's the best option. I have a question. That's probably your most common question. How much does Sentinel cost?
So Sentinel can actually be quite cheap if we think of it as entry-level Sentinel. So if we think of kind of just taking the Microsoft bits, it's actually under $500 a month in a real production environment. So if you have about 1,500 to 2,000 users, you can do a bare bones for under $500. Now you have a low data retention by doing that, of course, right? So data is always the catch here. So and we would tune the rules to run infrequently. So we would not want to have something running like every 30 seconds because that's going to definitely be a higher cost. But chances are, if you're looking at entry level, you want to test out Sentinel. You want to try it out maybe in a bit of a longer term POC. And I've actually done a couple where, or a couple of implementations, I should say, where customers have wanted to do a bit of a long-term POC, but bring it to parity with one of their other SIEM solutions that they're using, just to see how everything works on both sides of the fence. And I really encourage, all of our customers to try that, because I think, the best way to learn a tool and to understand what it can do for you is first start a POC and get it well configured. So you really want to make sure that you understand all of the Microsoft Learn content. There's for free so many different educational tools that we can utilize with Sentinel, not the least of which is Sentinel Ninja training, which is 100% free from Microsoft. And you even get like a fun little cool certificate for it. It's not a full role-based certification, but it's a really fun one to do. And it really does help expand the knowledge that you have for the Sentinel product ecosystem and all of the accoutrement that goes with it. So it can be quite fun to do some of that training as well. Yeah, so to answer the question, yes, you can do it for very cheap, and definitely you can scale it up for as much data retention and as much automation as your heart desires in that case. Feel free to weigh in the chat if anybody has any interesting questions, or if you're able, go ahead and unmute and fire away.
Yeah, I don't see any questions. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of people due to the delay starting the whole thing. Oh, there's a question. Good.
It is easy to get non-Microsoft data into Sentinel. So if I were to answer your question maybe this way, so a well-configured Sentinel environment would include bringing in data from on-prem. We would use a syslog or a Ceph connector, and we would bring data in from, Palo environments. Definitely, we would bring in Active Directory domain services, any on-prem exchange, things like that. If you can put it into syslog or Ceph, you can bring it into Sentinel, and we can also transform and filter that data on the way in. So when I think of bringing in stuff like Palo logs, I always think, well, you really just need probably about a quarter of what Palo's giving you from an analysis perspective. So you can bring it in and you can filter it and cut out some of that data to help optimize your data storage and data retention costs over time as well. So yes, easy peasy, in fact, to bring in data from all sources.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for that. So, and I guess having data from different sources also help with correlation, right? As you said, information is, knowledge is power, right? So the more sources you can aggregate, the better is the investigation and automation.
Yeah, definitely. So when we think of Sentinel and we think of kind of, if I hear the statement, I want to be able to correlate events across my whole environment, on-prem, remote endpoints working from home, but also in the data center and also in our Azure tenant. Well, what I really hear is I want to bring in logs from various sources so that I can correlate that. So one of the best ways to do that at a really granular level is using, I would say, 3 different kind of core technologies. So one, we bring in Defender for Identity. That gives us logins on endpoints, logins that are recorded by all of the domain controllers for on-prem and in Azure. And it also, will of course have the Azure Active Directory or Microsoft Entra ID logs as well in that same subset. Then we also want to bring in any network logs from on-prem. But we also want to bring in things like Azure Firewall or any next-gen firewalls that we have deployed in other cloud estates as well. So if you're using, I'll pick on Palo again, but if you're using Palo Alto, you would connect to Panorama, for example, your management tool, and you would bring everything in for the whole network estate, but we would filter it to just the pieces of information we need. So things like MAC ID, IP address, and user identity would be definitely top of mind. And then we can start to correlate those. So if we combine that with Defender for Endpoint or 365 Defender for Endpoint, I think it is now, then we have everything we need. So we have all the endpoint, we have all the login, and we have all the network activity. So now we can really start to correlate events everywhere in the entire estate, on-prem and everywhere. Nobody can hide at that point. So yeah, there can be a lot to it, but tying it together is really critical. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're monitoring those things. So if we're using a syslog collector, we would monitor that syslog collector like any other VM, but we would also add enhancements through health monitoring for that so that we can know about it quickly inside Sentinel. So we'd want our SOC or SecOps team to know about that really quickly. So I typically schedule those to run at least once a day, or sometimes every 12 hours is also kind of a typical configuration as well. And that way the team knows about problems really quickly, and we can head those things off at the pass and not be missing much data if something does go wrong. Long-winded answer, sorry. I might have had a cup of coffee before this event. Has anybody ever seen me without a cup of coffee? There's
I
a
was going
different
to
question.
say, every time we talk, you seem pretty excited. So I guess it was just your normal state. So I don't see any other questions. So I'm sorry again about the glitch that clearly had a hit. Oh, good. Another question. See, every time I say
There's
there's
one
no
here.
questions. So you mentioned that Sentinel can bring in syslog data easily, but there are predefined connectors for non-Microsoft data that don't generate syslog data.
Yes, there sure is. If you go to Content Hub in Sentinel, there is what I would describe as just a ton of partner connectors in there. So other organizations work with Microsoft and they build those. I think a great example of that is Cisco. Now, you can export Cisco logs to syslog or Ceph, but you can also use their custom connector through Content Hub, and you get different filtering options using that built-in solution that you can publish to your workspace through Content Hub. So yeah, absolutely. It's actually really exciting because Content Hub is just growing and growing over the last maybe 2 years. And there's a lot of variety and a lot of very high quality products inside Content Hub from partners. It's really good stuff there. You can use a pre-filter. I see the next question there. Any thoughts on Cribble for filtering and transforming data for Sentinel? So yes, I have many thoughts on data transformation. I actually prefer to use data collection rules to do that, mainly because I work within the Microsoft ecosystem most days. But if you have a tool that you would prefer to use for, I would call it maybe pre-filtering, absolutely go ahead and do that. I really think it's quite important that we understand in Sentinel that a log analytics workspace is truly a storage account, right? It's just a storage account. Its job is to aggregate all of our data, keep it for as long as we tell it, and allow us to do queries against that data that's in the workspace. Now, we have to be careful with that. We have to be, good stewards of our environment and good stewards for our organizations and our customers. And we should filter that data before it even gets put into the log analytics workspace, because if we don't use it, why are we keeping it, right? So we may have a reason to keep it if we don't use it, such as compliance requirements or legal requirements. But outside of that kind of maybe vision or scope, I would say it's more important to filter that data and prevent the organization from paying for storage than it is to just keep everything. Often when we jump into a SIEM to deploy it, the typical mentality kind of historically has been keep everything forever until somebody tells me I have to cut it because the budget's too big now. We don't really necessarily recommend doing that so much now. I would say filter the data before it comes to the log analytics workspace. Use a DCR or data collection rule to filter it at the ingestion point, if possible as well. And carefully set your retention requirements on the log analytics workspace. And kind of those three things combined, I think would give you a very robust data collection solution, and you would be quite optimized and really only spending what you need to on the retention of all that data. You have to remember, if we have 1 terabyte a day coming in our logs, that starts to add up. That's 30 terabytes a month. And if we're keeping it for, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, it starts to compound, right? It's the compound interest problem when it comes to data storage, but that's everywhere, right? So cloud is consumption based, and it's just something to be aware of as part of your overall design and architecture, I think. Yeah, we have to be good stewards.
So,
All
Andrew,
right.
what's the best way to follow what you do?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. I think I publish pretty much everything I do on LinkedIn now. And you can also check out my blog at azuretracks.com. I publish articles at least every 2 weeks, sometimes once a week. And I often have many Sentinel and Azure security related tips and articles. And on occasion, I'll write a couple of ad hoc articles that are way off topic, but just fun for me to do. So, yeah. If you only want Azure or security content, I'm probably not the right guy to follow. But if you want a little bit of variety and a little bit of spice, then yeah, go ahead, have a follow, and hopefully some of the tips and the articles can help you out. Absolutely.
Great. So, yeah, on my behalf and on behalf of the VanTUG team, thank you very much for making this happen. You're actually, we work together quite a bit now, but it's good to see you as a speaker because I never had the opportunity, and you're actually an awesome speaker. So we'll make
Oh my
sure we
goodness,
invite you more often.
yeah, I'd be happy to join. It's an absolute pleasure. Yeah, talkative bunch, right?
Right. Thanks,
Dry
Andrew,
sense of humor.
and thank
Thank
you
you so
all.
much. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks.